Hey y'all, it's Jen and welcome to my channel Ifers Inklings. Today's video is going to be my April 2021 wrap-up. I'm a little behind on getting this filmed, so I hope I remember what these books are about. But stay tuned to see what I read and what my reading month looked like. Let's just dive straight into this. I had a fairly good reading month, but I did DNF one of them. Officially read 8 books, and then my 9th one I DNF'd. I also had a lot of nonfiction that I read in this month, so I hope I remember what all these books are about and what I really thought of them. But 3 of them were memoirs. 1 was a nonfiction other. I just don't know how to categorize it, and then nonfiction science was the other nonfiction. And then I read 1 mystery thriller and 2 contemporary books. Of those, 2 of them were YA, 6 were adult, 7 of them were standalones, and 1 of them was part of a series. 5 were new authors to me, and 3 were authors that I had previously read. So let's just get into what I thought about these. So the first one I listened to audiobook of, The Culprit. So The Culprit is a memoir. It is about a man who owns, and a wife, a man and his wife, who decides to get a cat, a Bengal cat specifically. And if you know anything about the Bengal breed, they are usually pretty big characters. And they're large cats. They're bred with half domesticated cat and a half wild cat. I can't remember the exact name of the wild breed, but it's a smaller breed of wild cat. So they have usually a big personality. They are larger cats, and they are usually very active and playful and that kind of thing. So it was an interesting tale. I gave this book 3.5 stars because halfway through this memoir, and it's a small memoir, but halfway through it, we go off on this complete tangent about his kids growing up when they were little, and kind of how he got started and met his wife, and them owning a horse. And I didn't quite understand why we flashed back to that. Because it really didn't have much to do with the cat, which was the main part of the story. And so then we just all of a sudden, like the last chapter, flash back to the cat, and it just doesn't make any sense. That, like, the whole progression of it, it's like, this makes no sense. It's like 2 separate books. It really made me think that he wrote the original story about the cat and then turned it into his publisher, and you know, they said, this is really too short. I need you to add a few 100 pages to this. But, you know, add about another 100 pages, and then we'll call it good. So we just shoved that in the middle of it. I kind of see how it made sense to the story to introduce a couple of new characters, but they're not really characters. They're people. They're like real people. But it just didn't flow correctly. And it was very jarring, and it pulls you out of the story, and it was just like, what am I missing? So anyway, that is why I gave it that rating. It was funny though. I mean, it was funny, and the author used a lot of the alliterations. It was intentional, and I don't have a specific example, but there was a time they were talking about the Christmas tree and the cat and the ornaments and stuff, and the cat being curious about it and nearly knocking the tree over. But every word of that sentence, or those sentences, were all started with a C. And so it was like the author did that several times throughout the story. And I really did enjoy that. It kind of made it fun, but not enough to add any stars. The next book that I listened to on audio was a nonfiction book, Those Who Wander, and it's about the lost children or the homeless children, specifically focused on children in LA. This was kind of a hard book to read, but it was also very interesting. There is definitely a problem with homeless children or houseless children, and a lot of people in the homeless community, they're not really homeless, they're just houseless, and they don't really want a house for various different reasons. And especially when you talk about the children, a lot of the children that end up on the streets come from broken homes, abusive homes, neglectful homes, age out of the foster care system, where they didn't get any kind of real training on life. You know, it's still a lot of neglect, and the choices that they make, because they have such trust issues from their upbringings and their childhood, they don't trust people and have a hard time fitting into normal society. And a lot of them choose that life because they feel like it's the safer option, even though it's extremely dangerous. Most homeless children don't commit crimes. There's not a lot of crimes committed in the childhood homeless community. Obviously, some still do. The book starts out following a group of 4 people who have made the choice to be homeless, kind of that vagabond life. That was kind of what they were going for, but they ended up murdering a girl and robbing, and then robbing and carjacking another man. And of course they got caught because they were like, I don't know, 16 years old, and nothing, you know, they weren't committing the perfect crime. It was crimes of opportunity. But that's not something that's very typical, and the people in the homeless and houseless communities are usually very much people who look after each other, especially with the younger people. So I found it very interesting. I found it very eye-opening, and at the same time I found it very just sad and almost that despair. As a mom, I can't imagine my children living on the streets. And of course I know that I raised them in a household where the streets weren't a better option, you know. I mean, they were provided for, they were loved. I wasn't a perfect parent, nobody is, but you know, I was able to keep them safe in a loving household, where the children in this that choose homelessness or houselessness don't usually have that kind of environment, and someone that, I don't want to say they don't have people that care about them, but they don't have people that they feel safe with, and that just breaks my heart. And so that was kind of hard too, but I found it, like I said, I found it very interesting and very informative, and I highly recommend it. It was told very well, and I think it covered everything it needed to cover. The next book that I read was The Poet X by Acevedo. What's her first name? I listened to the audiobook of that, and I really love listening to her audiobooks because she writes it's a prose style. Poet X is slam poetry. It's a book full of slam poetry, and it is amazing. And so it was really nice to listen to. That experience really lends well to this story because it's a story about slam poetry, and the whole book itself is slam poetry. And it's about a girl who writes puns, but her mother is an immigrant and doesn't understand why she wants to pursue the career she wants to pursue. She wants her to be, you know, a housewife and find a good husband, kind of take over taking care of the mom in her old age, and you know, those traditional values for women from other cultures. And our main character is being raised as, you know, in America, and so she's seeing the American culture and American way of life, and she's very conflicted between what her mother expects of her from their culture versus what she's being raised in to be her, you know, kind of her own person and pursue her own dreams. I think a lot of different kids go through that, especially, I cannot imagine that this story is unique to this particular family. I imagine that there is that conflict with a lot of children and parents that have immigrated into the U.S. from different cultures and have different, you know, conflicting belief systems because of the two different places that they were raised. And so I'm sure that that creates a huge conflict and a lot of guilt in the children who want to do what their parents expect of them based on their culture, because it's all important and those are family values and all that. The mother was I think she thought she was doing the right thing, but she was going about it completely wrong, and there was a lot of pain in this book, and actions that we would not consider acceptable in our normal society. I don't want to speak on that culture because I don't know it. It's not part of my culture. I found it to be kind of sad, and again, kind of that heartbrokenness for this girl who just wants to be true to herself, but she also doesn't want to disappoint her mother and her family, and she wants to live up to their values, but she also wants to be her own person. I enjoyed getting a new perspective on other people and things that other people have to deal with in other cultures. I gave it 5 stars. Obviously, it was amazing. Then my next audiobook was The Law of Innocence by Michael Connelly. It is the newest book in the Mickey Haller series, or The Lincoln Lawyer. I gave this one 5 stars. I love this series. He has another series, the Harry Bosch series, which is a police detective kind of mystery thriller book. The Lincoln Lawyer, Mickey Haller series is obviously, he's a criminal defense attorney, and he gets, in this particular one, he gets involved, he gets himself into a little bit of trouble, finds himself in need of a criminal defense attorney. So it was, that perspective of it was very interesting. Him going through the case to figure out how to defend himself was really interesting, and I just love it. And that is kind of the basis of all of the stories. It's definitely from the perspective of the criminal defense attorney and their procedures, and it's got a little bit of you know, there's always a bad guy involved that is trying to persuade Mickey Haller to not take this case. I am chatty today, and I apologize, but it's what you get. So the next book that I read was another nonfiction book. This was a memoir. What I talk about when I talk about running, I gave it 5 stars. I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name because I'm going to get it wrong. So I will put it on here. You will recognize it as soon as you see it. Murakami. I think it's Murakami. Anyway, it's on the screen here. So this memoir, it's about running, but it's not really about running. It's about his writing process, how he got started, how he keeps himself not healthy, but keeps himself healthy. It's more of that challenge of starting and completing something and getting himself exhausted and being productive instead of just sitting at a desk all day. And when he is able to run, and then he's able to write. It's kind of that process in how he interconnects it, and it hasn't always been running, but there was other things that he kind of tried out, I guess, through the years. But I just found it really interesting about his writing style and how it evolved and how he got started in writing, how running plays a part in that. Like I said, I don't know what else to say about it, because it's a memoir. And anyway, I found it enjoyable, and I gave it 5 stars because I thought it was well told. And you know, I kind of took away something from it, which was, you know, making sure you concentrate on yourself and not just your work is very important, and it's one of the ways to keep yourself productive. And then remember, I'm on this nonfiction kick for this month in April, so I listened to The Body Keeps the Score. I gave it 5 stars. This book was really difficult to listen to. I thought it was very well done. It was very informative. I got a lot of insight into it. As someone who suffered from childhood trauma, especially neglect and sexual abuse in my childhood, that's what this book centers on, is the people that experience those and how those traumas in your childhood really impact your adult life and your mental illnesses, and how those manifest in your body. And things that help, like people that have childhood trauma, medications don't typically help with their mental illnesses. Someone who is depressed, you know, just someone who is depressed but didn't have the childhood trauma, medication is often very valuable to them. But someone who had the childhood trauma of abuse, neglect, they react differently to it. So their depression, their anxiety, their other mental illnesses, PTSD, things like that, it manifests in your body where you get these physical ailments, and doctors can't explain them away, but they're real, but they don't have a cause to it. And so a lot of that, your body reacts to that trauma, or it's a coping mechanism, or I don't know how to explain it well, but they found that people who go through those traumas, the traditional medication doesn't help with their mental illnesses, and sometimes can make it worse and make them suicidal. One of the things that they found for those in his years of therapy work and treating people with severe childhood trauma is a lot of times physical activity really helps. Running, hiking, exercising, yoga especially, helps release the tension that your body holds, and releases the trauma that your body holds from those experiences. And then it also helps affect your mood and your mental health and your coping skills. And so I just found that real interesting, especially since I just went through a psychological evaluation to get my official adult diagnoses. And all of this was kind of reflected in my report. You know, my childhood trauma is what is completely affecting my life and has affected my life for the last 40 years. This is a long book. It's thick, it's detailed, it's a lot of case studies, but it's done in a way that it doesn't feel like you're reading case studies. It's told very informative and more in layman terms. The audiobook was really long. I think it's 13 hours. I had to take several breaks from this. I could listen to it a chunk at a time, but I was getting so almost emotionally involved in it that it was almost like I was in a therapy session every time, where you get that just emotionally draining. Even though you know it's helpful, it's still emotionally draining. And I was getting that same result listening to this audiobook. So I had to take it in doses. I would listen to a few hours of the audiobook, and then I would have to stop and do something different. And so I think it took me like a week to read this one. But again, I thought it was phenomenal. There's a lot of people that talk about this on BookTube, especially recently, and it is worth all the hype. It is an older book. It was published in 2014, but it's very well done and very insightful. And I think everyone should read this book, whether you have suffered it's some kind of childhood trauma, or if you haven't, I guarantee you know someone that has, and it could be very insightful into how they are coping and dealing with things, and how those traumas affect you as a person. So the next book, I did listen to this on audio, but it was My Heart and Other Black Holes by Jasmine Warga. This entire book focuses on suicide. So we're just putting that out there. This book relates to suicide. The main characters are suicidal. They want to die. There's something that has happened in their lives that has caused this. But they've made a pact to be suicide buddies. I gave this book 4 stars because while I do believe that people who are suicidal can have something or someone come into their life and make them see life is worth living, even if it is just for the fact of you don't want to hurt other people. But I know that that's a criticism that this book gets a lot. Falling in love isn't going to make you not suicidal, but falling in love could very well be the point where you realize that maybe I can get through life. You know, that could be the turning point for you to, even though it doesn't solve your depression or solve the why you're suicidal in the first place, it could be that path to say, maybe there's another option, and if I get some help and some therapy, I can get through this, and maybe I won't be suicidal. You know, whether it's medication. I mean, obviously therapy needs to happen too, but I think that there are things that can change in a person's life to where maybe they're not suicidal. And I say that as someone who attempted suicide and has at different points in my life thought everybody around me would be better if I was dead, but who didn't ever get to the point again of actually attempting suicide because of my children. I mean, plain and simple. Even when I was like thinking, if, you know, it would be so easy just to drive my car off this bridge into these trees and die. I mean, it would look like an accident. It's raining, or, you know, whatever. I couldn't do that to my kids. And they were literally the reason why I didn't try to kill myself again in my early 20s. So I firmly believe that that can happen. I am not suicidal in any way anymore. Sure, I have bad days. Sure, I have good days. But I think that that is one of those things that, you know, love isn't an easy fix, but it can be one of the reasons why you try every day. And I think that's important. So that is all I'm going to say about this book. If you want to read it, I thought it was told very well, especially as a teen who's committed suicide, or as a teen who wanted to die, who had that, attempted suicide. Obviously I didn't commit it because I'm still here, but from that teenage perspective, especially the teenage girl's perspective, I can understand. And not everybody's experience is going to be the same. So even though someone else maybe read this book and find that that is not something that they relate to, it is relatable to somebody, and your experience isn't everybody's experience. And that's all I'm gonna say. So 4 stars. The next book I read was Sitting Pretty. I did listen to this on audio. I gave it 5 stars. It is a memoir, and it is about a woman who is actually local to Kansas City. Lives in Kansas City. She works in Kansas City. She grew up just outside of Kansas City. So I found that aspect of it very interesting. But she has been wheelchair bound since she was a child, and it really talks about her experience as being a disabled person, someone who is wheelchair bound, who can take a few steps, but she's really mostly wheelchair bound, and just the difficulties that happen and that disabled people face. The world wants you know, we claim to be disability friendly, but then when someone who needs certain accommodations seeks those accommodations, they can't find them, and there's not help around that can be easily addressed, and just the problems that it comes with, and how they're always having to advocate, and how differently they're treated just because they don't have the same abilities as somebody who is not disabled in the same way they are. You know, for example, people who are wheelchair bound often have non-wheelchair bound people try to help them and think that they can't do something that they do by themselves every single day. Like, for example, she has a vehicle that has been modified for her to be able to drive without using her legs. So she's able to get out of her wheelchair into her car, put her wheelchair up, you know, and get the wheelchair into her vehicle, and vice versa. And she's all the time having people try to help her. Usually they cause more of a problem and more of a time delay because she's used to this. She can get in and out of that wheelchair and get it in her car in about 30 seconds, where someone else trying to help and her having to explain to them how to do it takes a whole lot longer, and it would have already been done if they had just let her do what she's been doing every day of her life for, you know, up 10 years. So it talked about that. It talked about just the accessibility of housing and the language we use in, especially in like fundraisers for disabled people. Most of the time there's not a lot of disabled people involved, and so the wording and the presentation and being like the token disabled person at an event for disabled people is kind of how that kind of all is very not cool. There's a lot of work to be done for able-bodied people to help people in the disabled community and the various disabled communities, whatever that may be. And I found it very interesting, and I found it even more so interesting knowing that she's a local person and author and businesswoman to the Kansas City area. And that brings me to my final book, My Very 90s Romance by Jenny Colgan. I DNF'd this book. I got, I don't know, not very far in, but what really did it for me was that there is a character, I'm assuming the love interest, because that's what it was building it up to be, who is this quiet guy who prefers to be left alone, just hang out in his room, do his work on the computer, doesn't really talk to anybody, doesn't want to interact with anybody. And 3 times they referred to him as the autistic guy, but it wasn't in a way that was relevant. I mean, there was nothing in there. It was made based off of stereotypes. Like, there was nothing in the stories that said he was an autistic person, but they referred to him in almost derogatory. You know, this nerdy guy, oh, he's autistic, or, you know, my autistic boyfriend, or I don't know what it was about it, but it just left a bad taste in my mouth. And as the parent of an autistic child, it just rubbed me the wrong way. Just rubbed me the wrong way. So, because there's so much more to them to an autistic person than the stereotypes. And not every autistic person is the same. Not all autistic people like computers and want to be left alone. And like I said, they weren't using it as a way to explain his behavior. They were using it as a way to joke about his behavior and his characteristics, almost making fun of him. And it just left a bad taste in my mouth. And then there were 2 women that they referred to that she didn't like, but she kept referring to them as monkeys instead of people. And I don't know what their racial qualities were, but it didn't matter to me. You don't refer to people you don't like as monkeys. And it just, like I said, it just left a bad taste in my mouth, and I'd probably only listened to 30% of this book. This book was copyrighted in 2001, so it's not like this book was written in the 80s and 90s where people got away with that kind of language. This was 2001. We know it's not appropriate to call people monkeys. We know it's not appropriate to derogatorily joke about someone being autistic. Even in 2000 we knew that, and it just left a bad taste in my mouth, and so I DNF'd it because of those reasons. And that's it. That is my long ass wrap up of not a lot of books. So I hope you enjoyed it. So if you enjoyed it, please give me a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, if you're gonna read any of them based on me talking about them today, and if you've got any suggestions, recommendations for books like these, really nonfiction books. I love memoirs, especially interesting ones, scientific, what's it called, nonfiction, things like that. Or if you have any great of the legal thrillers from the defense attorney's point of view, absolutely put those recommendations down below, because I'm always looking for new books to check out. And with that said, if you've enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed, I would love for you to be a subscriber to my channel, and you know, so you can hang out with me anytime I do post new videos. And what you're going to see on the screen now is going to be a playlist of my past wrap-ups, and then also a video that YouTube thinks you would enjoy of mine. So hopefully if they picked a good one out, you'll have to be sure and let me know. And until next time, I really appreciate you watching my video, and hope you'll stick around. And I will talk to you later. Bye now.